It is no secret that I love Final Fantasy XIII, right? I don't like picking favorites, but if people push me, I'll just tell them it's my favorite in the series. Maybe part of that is because I'm a little sicko and I like causing problems on purpose. In fact, that is actually why I tell people Final Fantasy IV is my least favorite, but I think it runs a little deeper than that. So, okay, story time. Back in the day, before I was an internet cat, hell, before I even was, like, transed by the media or whatever, I was actually big into both the Spoony experiment and Zero Punctuation, neither of which are running anymore. Whoops. But I like them. I was, if you could believe, not the type to have hard opinions about anything as a youth. Or rather, I had opinions, but I was too nervous to express any of them because talking to anyone about anything was a constant game of social Russian roulette. That being said, if someone were able to make me laugh while expressing an opinion, I'd more or less adopt that opinion uncritically because it's a convincing thing, you know, feeling smart because a clever person made it entertaining to believe in something they did. I think that's probably one of the overall best features of Zero Punctuation. Like people say it's the fast talking and the scathing meanness, and those are definitely factors, but it is the juxtaposition of his wit and delivery and the silly visuals with the extremely consistent aesthetic that, like, really made it work. God, like, The Escapist really fucked up with that one, huh? These two shows were my trash. I did also watch The Nostalgia Critic at the time. High school was really rough for me, but I remember kind of particularly liking these two a lot. I didn't watch everything Spoony did, though I watched all of his reviews on Ultima, a series I never ended up getting into, maybe because of those videos, but who's to say? I remember kind of weirdly enjoying his LP of Phantasmagoria 2, though I think that's just because I never saw a game like that before, and I found it unreal to witness. I can't even remember any of his commentary on it, and of course, I watched his Final Fantasy reviews.
Which, at long last, brings me to Final Fantasy XIII. And no, I have no idea why it took me so fucking long to review this piece of shit.
Now, further context, I think I hated Final Fantasy VIII for the longest time because of his review on it. It is, on many levels, a really goofy title, and if you go into it wanting it to be serious because, you know, maybe you've seen the Gunblade or heard the sinister choir music opening and thought that this was this big, serious, epic tale, only to find out that you can fire a dog at people, it can come off as jarring. And importantly, if you're the kind of person that knows enough about how to frame presenting a game like this to an audience, you can make it seem insultingly bad. And that was kind of Spoony's specialty at the time. You know, his style of commentary was a mashup of footage of the game or film he's reviewing, his own ripping of the material, either in the moment a la Mystery Science Theater or cutting away to let him rant about it, interspersed with,
Character design? What idiot came up with that?
Has anyone seen Neutro? I had it parked out back. It's a giant robot about, 200 feet tall.
Extremely of its time jokes. Some of them are kind of immature, some... Well, the humor hasn't aged well, but... okay. Before I get further into this, I do want to point out that this is not going to be like a video taking him down. I don't want to do a cadaver synod here. If you don't know what I'm talking about, ask my friend Evan. His internet presence went very, very quiet following Channel Awesome letting him go, and he stopped making video reviews entirely in 2016, citing mental health troubles. This isn't a drama video about Channel Awesome, this isn't a hit piece on Noah Antweiler. I'm not here to litigate what he did or who he is as a person. I think that it is interesting to look at what he wanted to say as a critic, though, because it reveals something we may need to talk about regarding modern media criticism. What? Well, I guess you're gonna have to watch the video to find out. Hello, and welcome... sorry. Welcome, one and all, to the season finale. This was going to be a Patreon goal, but they killed goals, so now I figure we'll make it the season finale, especially since this truly was my villain arc this year. I opened it accusing Elon Musk of having never played Mass Effect 3. God, do you remember that? My least popular video of the year. Incredible. And now look at me. I've gone full furry and am digging up an over 10 years old review of my favorite Final Fantasy. Fuck me. So, I have some beef. I know that there's on some level an entirely petty angle to picking on this ancient video, and obviously it's because I love Final Fantasy XIII. However, it's an important part of my past. I watched this review, took on his opinions as my own, and then I decided to get 13 and, like, hate play it. Unfortunately for him, I started playing it, and found myself genuinely having fun tracking down hunts and building my party and death-abusing Adamantoises in the Neochu fight for an early growth egg, and several years later, I find myself in the renaissance of people looking back on the game fondly, so I guess I win. But it's significant for me to talk about this because it was the first time I really meaningfully disagreed with someone whose opinion I respected. It was a big moment of personal growth, and for that I'm truly grateful, which is going to make the next part of the section a little awkward, because on rewatching his review, it's bad. But it is bad in an interesting and potentially useful way. Some parts of it have aged poorly, like, yes, the live sketches are kind of juvenile, and one of them was kind of racist, but they are very much products of the time. This was in 2012, the same year that To Boldly Flee came out. But it was in the age where Channel Awesome was this kind of cult internet phenomenon. Tons of critics were getting together and producing their own content. By the way, I was looking around for some research just to see if, like, people have ever looked at Channel Awesome outside of the controversies, and one of the thing led to the next, and long story short, don't look at the YouTuber fan wiki. It's monstrous. But yes, Spoony's work was hardly the first of its kind, and I do have an agenda. I do believe that he was not just wrong about this game, but on some level influentially wrong. Wrong enough that it ticked up the Google trend search thing for Final Fantasy XIII wrong. Like, not the highest it's ever been, sure, but like 3 years after the game released, you can see this uptick here, and is that enough to warrant this video? That's an interesting question that I'm going to answer after I do this video. See, here's the interesting thing. Basically, every criticism I've ever seen of this game shows up in this video, and what didn't end up in here was in Yahtzee's video on it. Like, a million years ago, I talked about that video, and it's like 5 minutes long and more or less boils down to him explaining that he generally doesn't like JRPGs, and also didn't like this one. I have no qualms with this kind of criticism, or do I'm sorry, I quickly rewatched it just to confirm, and overall, it echoes a lot of the similar talking points that Spoony's video did. I guess that's why I talked about zero punctuation in my old video instead, including it aging poorly in a lot of ways, and coming out a little bit before Spoony's, I believe. And, like, okay, yes, he doesn't care for JRPGs. He points back at Final Fantasy VI when the genre was good by his judgment. He says some profoundly wrong things about the characters, but he also only played 5 hours and kind of bragged about it, and, like, fine, it's okay if the game isn't your thing, but it also means that there's really only so much to say about it. Spoony, however, reviewed the whole thing and called it one of the worst games ever, so what's up with that? Well, I've been agonizing over this script, my goal with it, what I should talk about, but there really is no way through to my broader point than by first indulging in my owning the content of his critique on the internet. I assure you, this is for my own satisfaction more than anything else. If you don't want to hear me gripe about Spoony, yes you do. Let's go. Okay, so there's obviously, like, a lot of things wrong with Spoony's Final Fantasy XIII review that aren't really worth going into detail over. Yes, he spends a lot of time on silly sketches, and those will come in later, but also, while we're here, one of the things that sticks out in the review almost immediately is the way he gets stuck in minutia. After his overperformed apology to Final Fantasies VIII and X, because he just really has bad taste in Final Fantasy, he opens by incredulously asking a million tiny questions about the surface details of the game. Like, why can Lightning fight a big mech with a sword? Why does this lever have a Z pattern? Why do the robes look like that? You know, aesthetic details that are otherwise kind of endemic to fantasy video games in general, and Final Fantasy in particular. You know, ever since the very first title, the game has had a generally anachronistic playfulness to it. Flying castles staffed by automatons and a world that was otherwise pretty typically high fantasy. Coming in hard on pure aesthetic complaints seems harsh and kind of nonsensical, considering that Spoony likes Final Fantasy VI, and in fact praises Sabin, a monk, suplexing a train. Like, we can take this deeper too, right? Like, we can look at the way he talks about these characters in ways that seriously misunderstand the story itself. Like, okay, he hates snow and he hates hope. the hatred of Snow is, in my humble opinion, at least a little more comprehensible because his introduction is kind of blunt and abrasive. Like, look at this guy, talking about being a hero in the middle of a war zone and brushing aside Spoony's extended rant on his weapon not making any sense because I cannot hold it within me to care enough to want to talk about this kind of needly pedantry more than I already have. You can kind of get the initial frustration. He brags about being a hero, and immediately a bunch of people he's trying to rescue outright die. Like, now, this point is kind of critical, because Spoony is not the only one who sees this beat and gets upset about this braggart of a character. And I have to gently point out that these introductions are, in fact, deliberate. This game, turns out, wasn't written by accident. See, the first 5 members of the party are introduced in a way that establishes a general outline of their character, but most prominently, their flaws. Lightning is aggressive and wrathful and violent, to the point that she seems almost callously indifferent to Saz's life, even as he helps her fight the army. Saz himself seems cowardly and nervous, but continues to fight for reasons that aren't clear yet. Snow believes that he can be an anime protagonist and save the world and save his fiancée, even in the face of concrete proof that he can't. Hope witnesses his mother die because of Snow's brazen heroism, and is in a constant struggle between his grief and his rage. Vanille, rounding it off, acts bizarrely, something that Yahtzee was pretty upset about, but is also the narrator of the story, revealing an awareness of the gravity of the situation far above what may be clear initially. See, not to get too wrapped up in media criticism problems, but a lot of popular stories, like Fire Emblem or Persona or most modern Disney films, have kind of perfected the soft touch when it comes to flawed characters. What are the flaws of the cast of Persona 5? Like, the biggest flaw any of them have is probably... what, Futaba being a traumatized introvert, a thing that you address the worst parts of in the arc she's introduced in? Like, when characters that we're supposed to be invested in and care about have flaws, oftentimes it's kind of easier to sort of gently approach them, either by making them trivial, or by taking a lot of time to first introduce them in a wholly positive light for a while, and then start to creep into the bigger issues, a la Steven Universe. This really is starting to feel like a season finale. The gang's all here, baby. Let's go. Okay, in contrast, Final Fantasy XIII is very deliberate in showing these characters pretty unflatteringly, and that's kind of because more than any bigger conflict or story that you could dig out of the data log, the other huge sin both Yahtzee and Spoony fall into, like, this game is really about the 6 party members. Knowing them, their perspectives and insecurities and conflicts takes up the bulk of the first half of the game. As you're out here familiarizing yourself with this strange new battle system, you're watching what should have been a classic Final Fantasy, party gathered together for a noble goal break itself apart almost immediately. Snow's braggadocious hero speech drives a wedge between him, Lightning, and Hope, to the point that the two of them split from him and then from Vanille and Saz, insisting on a warpath to the heart of their home planet Cocoon. And, let's put a pin in the Hope stuff, because it is a lot, and it is something that I have a real cross to bear, but anyway, the game is deeply concerned with the struggles of these characters, and it comes at the expense of the ego of the player. They make you take control of Saz, as the scene in Nautilus frames his next action as hunting Vanille down to kill her. I'd use other examples here, but the point is made, right? In an era of the player's ego, with such highlights as Persona 5, or Fire Emblem Three Houses, or Engage, or most contemporary Western RPGs, games built around satisfying the player's egos, games with stories that are built to constantly frame the point of view character as powerful and decisive and respectable, no matter the given circumstance or context they're placed in. I could stretch things and point out that this functions even in a lot of games with clearly defined characters too, like arguably in Halo or God of War or even Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, if we really want to stretch things, but by and large, silent protagonists, self-insert protagonists are taking up way more of the AAA landscape these days, and for better or for worse, Lightning is not a self-insert, and the game commits to that. You don't learn all the vocabulary or have big scenes where characters just out and explain basic mechanics of the world, because what is important is following these characters as they struggle to understand their role in the world now. Also, there are definitely a couple scenes where they do just explain things out and out to us, and they're at least done in a way that's motivated by the characters. Vanille doesn't know about Cocoon government officials because she's from Pulse. Fang gets to explain some parts of how a focus works to Lightning because she's already done this before, and Lightning hasn't. Look, If it seems like I'm kind of meandering around the periphery of Spoony's criticisms here, that's because the heart of the problem is kind of complicated to merely address. Like, do you all remember my Steven Universe video where I talked about constructing a public? I'm not going to go so far as to say Spoony is doing something quite that egregious. He's not portraying Final Fantasy XIII as so evidently bad that his single task is just to detail why, but he is an eminently biased critic, framing his criticisms objectively. Good games don't do the things that Final Fantasy XIII does. Good games would explain logically and consistently why the robes look that way, or why the lever has a Z formation, or what a fal'C is, or how Snoge's jacket works, or whatever minor gripe that he agonizes over. He's so committed to his own framework of what a good game is that he seemingly cannot fathom why anyone would write a game like this because it is so bad, and that framework starts to topple the whole house of cards. The data log exists, which, if you're going into this game demanding a devotion to pedantry, proves that the game was written so badly that the actual story is, in fact, relegated to background material that you have to read on your own time, obliterating the capacity to recognize a story being told to you that focuses on the emotional stakes of the characters. Is it important in the grand scheme what a fal'C is? Well, kind of, but the mechanics of it, the technology, the cosmology of it, kind of isn't. Contextually, we can see that they're big, scary, godlike beings that impose edicts onto people, drafting them into their service, and critically, the game highlights what this means to every major character as they are conscripted into being l'Cie. You know, as a thought experiment, while getting footage for this video, I considered what it would look like if 13 got drafted for, like, a remake, a second chance to rework this game. Like, I feel like the promise of that might be appealing to the crowd that kind of likes some parts of the game, but remain pretty stuck on the infamous shortcomings, the linearity, the confusing terminology, the hope not being a cool enough 14-year-old, but I wouldn't really want to change much at all. Like, okay, the hand-holding tutorial stuff is pretty annoying to work through, considering that you can pretty easily press the A button through every fight until your HP gets low enough that you need to swap into a healing paradigm. At least until you get to Pulse, where the community largely considers the game to get good, expanding in both scope and complexity, but like, I don't know, I kind of get it. The time that they use tutorializing is also spent picking at Lightning, Hope, Saz, and Vanille, slowly fleshing out why they all behaved the way they did when the party split in the Vile Peaks. Yes, you're learning pretty meticulously how to use buffs and debuffs, which, you know, is a skill that becomes nigh essential later on in the game and something that almost every other Final Fantasy in the series is extremely bad at explaining, but at the same time, we can see Hope unable to get over his mother's death and blaming Snow for it, and how critically bad Lightning is at being able to meaningfully help him through this. Like, we see Saz and Vanille goof off in the Sunlit Waterscape, all while Saz kind of blindly keeps digging and agitating the insecurities and guilt Vanille has been hiding from everyone. You know, these conflicts are slowly built up as the game takes its time making sure you get to know how to play it. And where there's maybe a little bit of room to streamline things, to maybe clean up some of the more awkward exchanges, to maybe give us some more flexibility earlier on, the game is shockingly well built around its own progression and theming. So, okay, I should talk about the Hope hate. I'm sorry. Both Spoony and Yahtzee fucking hated Hope. And while I can forgive some things, some pacing issues, some complaints that they have about meandering particularities, even going so far as to, like, not liking Snow as a character, I have less sympathy for this. Like, okay, is he annoying and doesn't read Snow to filth immediately? Sure. But he's 14. Like, he watched his mom die, he's in the middle of a war, and is trying to talk to a bunch of adults that are busy talking past him because, again, he is 14. It's the kind of post hoc preservation of the ego to pretend that Hope is stupid and embarrassing and cringe, because if it were me personally... Wait, is that... Who is that?
Oh, where are my glasses? Oh, there they are. Yeah. Oh, that feels right. You know, people talk about Spoony like he's some kind of smart guy who's way smarter than the guy who wrote Final Fantasy XIII. And yeah, you really gotta hand it to Spoony, because those are some weird robes the Cocoon refugees are wearing, and that's a weird streetlight in Final Fantasy X. But sometimes you just see something so dumb that it takes you out of the review. I know Vivian doesn't edit videos with the fidelity that I tell other people to edit mine with, but roll the drawbridge clip.
Why does this lever move along a Z shape? Is that necessary? Would it not work if it wasn't in a Z shape?
If that were me personally, I wouldn't say something that makes me look like a stupid, dumb idiot. I'm not a dumb idiot, so I know that controls for complex machinery have bends and breaks in them as fail-safes. You don't want some kid walking by to accidentally throw the switch and kill 100 people during the purge. If you want to see this in real-world action, check out the gear shift in this soulless leather interior modern SUV. Why would they build it like that? Do they seriously think a passenger might accidentally bump the shift and change gears? What a shitload of fuck. Spoony's hyper-focus on weird details like the robes and the drawbridge shift are surprisingly important details to his critical milieu, both for where he and his style came from and where his style would progress when it got into other hands. This attention to meaningless detail pours out of the character-driven review shows that dominated YouTube around the time of Spoony. The Angry Video Game Nerd and the Nostalgia Critic were the vanguard of this style. Take this random AVGN clip where he spends 45 of the 666 seconds of his Super Pitfall review talking about the first obstacle in the game.
Nice. Fucking beautiful. The first ladder you see drops you into a pit where you get killed by a bird or a bat, whatever it is. And even if it wasn't there, I'd fall on the spikes. So it's basically death insurance.
What you just saw is 6.7% of his review, and if we throw in the 45 seconds for the theme song and all the skits and the jokes and the gags, a full 100% of the AVGN Super Pitfall video is a comedy sketch. And yeah, that's what AVGN was, and mostly still is. The sketch review is the basis for Spoony. He has an opening theme song, and he does skits. Here he is naked somewhere in the FF13 video.
Lubricates the shaft.
Here he is being horny, fantasizing about a threesome with Keistis and, I don't know, probably another fake woman. We can sit around the campfire and have a merry discourse about how Spoony's antics haven't aged well, or the edgelord humor of other review characters like Red Letter Media's Mr. Plinkett haven't aged well, but it doesn't really matter. Humor and skits told through characters have mostly left the online media review sphere, as the space has mostly stripped out character acting in favor of the naked critic, a reviewer who is themselves, and that change is attributable in part to Spoony. Spoony's stylistic influence is Mystery Science Theater 3000, a fact that he was always open about, and it really does manifest in the extended linear riff that he does of games and movies and breaking the flow up with skits and weird characters. Dr. Insano is the internet's Dr. Forrester. The problem, entirely out of Spoony's control, is that his audience severely misread his work. In 2024, it's easy to throw the Zoomer burns of media illiterate and fucking moron at Spoony, but hyper in-depth analysis and critique wasn't his actual goal. Sure, Spoony doesn't like Final Fantasies 8 or 13, but that's not the vision behind his creation. Spoony is a comedian, attempting to make laughs and jokes out of a game, but the people that saw and were subsequently influenced by Spoony's reviews saw them as serious critique, and it makes sense. Mystery Science Theater would pull out obscure and low-budget films from all over the world to riff, and they never entered themselves into contemporary discourse over popular media. Imagine swapping the Season 4 episode of the giant Gila monster with Terminator 2. That's essentially what Spoony did for 2000s gaming, swapping Super Pitfall with Final Fantasy XIII. It added a layer of relevance and audience interest in the target media itself to where the videos weren't just enjoyed as extended comedy sketches, but also as serious criticism. The influence of Spoony then became a string of popular internet critics that straddle the line between relevant, serious critique and character review. CinemaSins and Video Game Donkey are probably the most relevant of these types of critics. Even if you enjoy these reviewers, I personally enjoy Donkey and even do kind of enjoy Spoony. Sorry, Vivian, but this is my review now. This crossing between serious critic and character review poisons the relationship between viewer and text. Anyone who's ever discussed Donkey anywhere online has seen the way this relationship is weaponized. Donkey will give himself credit as a wise, visionary, serious critic who's saving video games when it suits him. And when he's being widely blasted for an opinion or obnoxious spoiler post, he claims the character defense and writes everything off as jokes and trolling. The critics after Spoony want the individual clout of being a visionary or intelligent critic, but also want the cover playing a character provides. No one ever criticized Joel or Mike or Tom Servo for bad takes, but no one ever called them critical geniuses either. The modern Spoonies want both. I don't want to be prescriptive, but for the most part, if you want to be an internet critic, you either have to see yourself fade behind your creation, or be able to take the heat for saying ridiculous things, which all critics worth anything say from time to time. If you call all your dumb, bad, stupid thoughts jokes, then I'm gone. I'm not here for mid. Seriously, I'm not here for mid. So I gotta get out of here. Have your review back. Goodbye.
Okay. Well, that's Professor Bopper, I guess. I'll link his channel in the description, and does he really think this video is... Anyway, I think he does bring up something here. Okay, Spoony really isn't the sole critic in the room, and the effects of his work have definitely reached beyond him, beyond his kind of weirdly endearing skits, in ways that probably he had no way of predicting. Oh yes. I think it's time to do a little drama YouTubing. Alright, so here's the thing. Ultimately, this whole video is threatening to come off as needlessly cruel. I get that. Spoony doesn't really do the Spoony experiment anymore. I know he streams, but he doesn't seem to have much of a huge presence outside of it, and while he's very opinionated on video games and films, isn't this a little much? Like, he's not a famous critic. He didn't work for a major publication, and this was back in the early years of the internet. Like, when we think about critics now, we think about big think pieces about whether or not criticism is even needed? Like, we already have companies no longer giving out review copies of their games because there is this huge narrative about how you can't trust critics. You can't trust Kotaku or Polygon or anything. And, like, one of the people kind of pushing that narrative is, you know, Dunkey, a video game critic. Or is he? He's just a comedic funny guy. If you don't like what he says about video games, he's just joking. But also, he's right. Video game critics fucking suck. What you should be watching is Angry Joe or Total Biscuit or fucking Pro Jared. Dunkey... Well, oh, the video came out like 2 years before the thing. Never mind. But look, look. Dunkey is kind of interesting to talk about here because, like, Spoony kind of blurs this line between criticism and performance, and Dunkey, to his credit, doesn't really do that. He owns himself as a critic, but it comes at a cost here, and it's the kind of growing competitive sport of online criticism. See, I'm sorry, I know this is about Spoony and I'm just hating on Dunkey. It's my villain arc, I gotta, but I saw his video game critics video and even Animal Jason's response video. Look, here's the thing, Animal Jason, I don't know how to call you, but that response he made to Dunkey grasps kind of at the heart of the problem here, and I think this quote of his kind of elegantly reveals it.
The best reviews are entirely subjective, but that doesn't mean you throw objectivity out the window. You have to build your case with honest statements that even someone who disagrees with you could relate to.
So, okay, let's start charitable here and talk about what I think is probably meant by this statement. That, like, yes, reviews are subjective, but that subjective opinion should be built on an honest assessment of a piece of art. No one is obligated to like any video game by some objective quality, but you need to be upfront and genuine about your views in a game. Jason takes issue with this because Dunkey goes into quite a bit of dishonest framing in his Octopath video, which undermines his bigger, grander statement about art criticism as a whole, but the thing I want to point to is the contextual understanding of subjective and objective and what it has done to the landscape of popular media criticism as a whole. Okay, so there's this kind of ephemeral idea that objective things are inherently better than subjective things, and in a lot of cases that's fair. If a product meets an objective standard of quality for, say, like, safety measures, and that product is a car, that's going to be way better than any one person's subjective idea of what would make a car safe. Maybe that person believes in all the things that would make that car safe, but if there's a standard in place that has reliably shown a consistent result, then that's going to be more useful. This kind of can't apply to art. Like, okay, there are objective qualities of art. Light goes in a certain way when you shine it on things. Paints have different textures. Genres arguably are built out of like a pseudo-objective qualia that can sort of be at least semi-objectively devised. A platformer game should at some point be a game about moving from platform to platform. A turn-based RPG should at some point have a system where two opposing sides take turns to do actions at each other. But the weird trick here is in building objectivity up as this aspirational goal for all things. But ultimately, criticism of art kind of can't be objective. That's how you get to Mahler. No, I'm not scrubbing through his videos for B-roll. You're welcome. I actually ended up digging around to make sure I'm not mischaracterizing Mahler here and wound up on both his subreddit and the EFAP wiki. Look, at this point, I need to take a step back here. I'm going to say something that sounded like pretty fucking damning of Donkey, Spoony, like the bulk of Channel Awesome, and I want to make a real distinction here. Yes, I do believe that you can trace the origin of a critic like Mahler, who has fully embodied the idea that there is a way to perfectly, objectively critique art, utterly refusing to comprehend that he is doing subjective art criticism, to creators like Spoony. But only insofar as developing that particular critical framework. As compelling as it may be to see a fan wiki that talks about EFAP with the kind of heady nerdiness that you see, like, old CA fans talking about the deep lore of their favorite critics back in the day, but only it's, you know, identitarian flavored. I do not believe that this collating or aspiring towards the fictional idea of objective art criticism turns you into a fascist or whatever. It definitely did for Mahler and his ilk, but that happens because there's something else going on in your life beyond thinking that you know what makes good video games or whatever. My main beef ultimately can be boiled down to this. While people like Mahler really only develop because of some more complex societal factors, the impulse towards objectivity as some kind of achievable thing in criticism is a deeply flawed one, born largely out of a mindset employed by this genre of outsider critics, and the effect has been a cumulative effort. Like, no, Spoony probably could never have predicted that him coming in and insisting that Final Fantasy at some point had a regimented standard of how to make games that have degraded, and now they're just making self-indulgent, incoherent shit, would itself be indicative of a general trend that would lead to a fundamental distrust and inability to meaningfully understand what criticism even is? No. This particular hell has a few factors in it, like Gamergate. Oh god. Well, mostly a movement to find prominent women and queer people in the games industry and, like, ruin their lives. Like, Gamergate used ethics in games journalism as a cover for their hatred, and that cover grew to just be kind of part of the reactionary movement that festered and grew post the, 2016 election. Look at the outrage fostered around Dean Takahashi for being upfront about not being good at Cuphead, fumbling through it, saying that the difficulty makes it appealing, and then getting eviscerated by a lot of people. Here's Sean's video detailing this. And also, here's a response video from someone who posted to r/Kotaku in Action, the subreddit for... Wait, Gamergate? Look, I was going to point out that the fake controversy of ethics in games journalism has ended up being something that a lot of reactionaries have sheltered into and just also turned into part of their campaign unironically, considering that such targets include Dean Takahashi, who's not a white man. But, like, here we are. Like, the Gamergate subreddit, I'm sorry, the self-proclaimed Gamergate subreddit literally framing Kotaku as one of the foundational targets of ridicule and aggression. Like, it's looking into the shit that makes it really easy to go wide with this kind of narrative and genuinely worry that our collective distrust of professional critics in favor of people who think that criticism is saying, video games used to be good when I was a kid, and everything that makes me feel like that kid is good, and any departure from that warrants a 2-hour rant about how the series is garbage. Look, in the book The Rape of Europa by Lynn H. Nichols, she assesses the world's response to Nazi Germany's acquisition of art that was previously ousted as degenerate, stating, with hindsight, the gradual progression toward this shameless event is clear to see. In the world of art, as elsewhere, the Nazis simply took existing prejudices and attitudes to incredible extremes. It is the ultimate framework at play, taking a hardline perspective attitude to what art should be and defining an entire cultural perspective around it. Like, fuck, I need to calm down. Okay, look, I'm not saying that Spoony was the writing on the wall for, the plague of online reactionaries. Like genuinely, I think I diverged here, critically. I've been talking to Bopper through the writing of the script, and he pointed out that you can draw the line from Spoony to CinemaSins to Dunkey easily enough, because they are all products of a movement towards a popular and bad form of internet criticism. It is the heart of anti-intellectualism, dressed up in a kind of nebulous pseudo-legitimacy, an outsider, but the only one you can trust for good opinions, because you can't trust games journalism these days. That Spoony doesn't like Final Fantasy XIII isn't just a bad opinion that I don't like, but it comes from a desire to prove, paradoxically, that he is smarter than the game. I agree with Bopper on this. I think primarily the reason we can see this ominous, dark road paved by Mahler, a useful idiot for the alt-right who's obsessed with being smarter than art himself, is that the mechanics at play, the need to see a story, a movie, a game as something oppositional, is something that maps onto reactionary thinking really easily. That's how you get the Museum of Degenerate Art. It is the radical nightmare end road of this line of thinking that you only get to if you're already kind of predisposed towards that particularly dire worldview. But that's not Spoony. Like, that's not him. It's not Dunkey or Red Letter Media or CinemaSins, Game Theory. Bad critics are a dime a dozen, and they are entitled to their opinions, dishonest framing and all. No, ultimately I do not believe that Spoony has to be penitent for the sins of the Spoony experiment or Final Fantasy XIII in particular, but if I've ever come off as extreme or fervent in my passion for art, this is at least part of it. It is important to think about the kind of criticism you take in, and part of that is not giving in to the idea that it's morally acceptable to just dismiss all professionals in the field by merit of being professional. You can like Spoony or Dunkey all you want. You can even like Mahler, but if you do, you're not allowed to tell me this. The goal here isn't to shame people into not liking internet personalities, but that it is important to understand what you're listening to. That you can and should take these views seriously, and that means being able to meaningfully disagree with them. That's a healthy part of this process. If this is the evolution of the art, if this is the new criticism, we need to treat it like that. And that means that these views, even views in comedically slanted performances, have to be considered seriously. And I'm not even out of line here. The course of history is bending in my favor more and more these days. I personally keep seeing more people getting into Final Fantasy XIII and wondering why people didn't like it, and that means I was right all along, and I win. Okay, I was going to end it there, but I want to try to speak more honestly about this. I expect that if, for some reason, this video breaches containment, and by some twist of fate someone gets defensive, that I've been harsh, at times almost worryingly so, about a cluster of amateur entertainers, and glass houses, I get it, I'm an internet nobody calling Spoony bad at his job, but I think that oftentimes these sorts of conversations, critiques on art, or even criticism itself, can fall into a moral team sports kind of mentality. Like what I did earlier, bringing up the identitarian German party's interest in creating a degenerate art museum, right? Is it a helpful mindset to try and attach a moral judgment to the entertainment that you consume, even if what I'm saying about the way such perspectives can degrade our cultural perception and understanding of media and how to understand it? Arguably no, right? That's the kind of complicated moral trap of this thing. What is at stake here is important. Yes, I firmly believe that we all need to be far more open-minded and thoughtful about art criticism. But that also shouldn't return directly back to a moral framing of your own consumption of entertainment. Just, I don't know, maybe try playing Final Fantasy XIII, or whichever game becomes the next weird pariah with an open mind. Oh, God, look, I'm trying to end this on a better note, okay? Being a villain all year sucks. Man, I feel like garbage. Special thanks to Alexi Angelica, Bees Louise, Caitlin Fisher, Cole Brayfield, Colleen T., Evan Kearns, Gail Simmons, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Narai the Redmarked, Professor Bopper, Saint Rawberry, Thomas Volpez, and Zetetic. Thank you all so much.